The morning sun was pale over Boston General Hospital, washing the city in soft gold. The waiting area smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, that quiet mix of exhaustion and hope that hospitals always carried. Ethan Miles, a 28-year-old construction worker with calloused hands and tired eyes, sat in the donor chair, rolling up his sleeve. He wasn't there for any noble reason. Not really. The nurse had smiled at him earlier when he'd signed up for the blood drive outside his worksite. It only takes 20 minutes to save a life, the flyer had said. 20 minutes, and maybe a free donut. Ethan wasn't the type to think much about kindness. Life had been too rough on him lately for that. His father's medical bills had swallowed his savings, and his relationship had ended just weeks before. He was running on habit, not hope. As the needle slipped into his arm, Ethan looked away, pretending to scroll through his phone. The nurse, Carla, smiled softly. "You nervous?" He shrugged. "Nah, just not a fan of seeing my own blood leave my body." She laughed quietly. "Fair enough, but trust me, somewhere out there, someone's gonna get a second chance because of this." Ethan smiled faintly, but didn't reply. He didn't really believe that. He was just another donor, a number on a bag. The machine beeped softly, marking the rhythm of his heartbeat, the steady drip of red into the transparent pouch beside him. Outside, rain began to patter against the hospital windows, soft, rhythmic, grounding. When the donation ended, the nurse handed him a juice box and a form. "Thank you, Mr. Miles. You've just done something beautiful." Ethan chuckled, half sincere. "Yeah, well, hope it helps someone who deserves it." He never asked who his blood would go to. He just left the hospital, pulling his jacket tighter as the drizzle turned heavier, never realizing that the bag of blood he'd just given away would one day circle back to save his life in a way no one could have predicted. As he walked into the rain, the camera of fate quietly turned toward another part of the city, toward a young woman lying unconscious in an ambulance, her pulse faint, her future hanging by a thread. The paramedic shouted, "We need O negative now!" And somewhere in the hospital's lab, a nurse lifted a fresh labeled pouch, donor ID EM, O negative, collected today. The universe had just begun to weave their destinies together. Rain fell through the night, washing Boston in silver streaks. Inside Boston General Hospital, a young woman lay unconscious in ICU room 307, hooked to machines that whispered life into her fragile body. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old, a freelance journalist, and someone whose heart had always beaten a little faster for stories about hope. But tonight, her own story hung by a single thread, a thread tied to a man she'd never met. Hours earlier, Emily had been driving home from a late-night interview when a truck skidded on wet asphalt and slammed into her car. Her seatbelt had saved her life, but she'd lost too much blood. By the time the ambulance arrived, her pulse was barely there. The paramedic's voice had been sharp with urgency. "Oh, negative! She needs blood immediately!" Inside the hospital's lab, a nurse hurriedly grabbed the latest donation from storage. Still warm, still labeled fresh. Donor, Ethan Miles, O negative. The red stream entered her veins, silent, unseen, yet life-giving. Her heartbeat began to steady. The monitor beeped stronger. A life once slipping away began to crawl back, and somewhere, far from that ICU room, Ethan sat alone in his tiny apartment, watching the rain tap against his window, unaware that his own blood now flowed through someone else's heart, keeping her alive. Days passed. Emily woke up slowly, her head heavy, her lips dry. She blinked against the sterile light above her. The nurse smiled warmly. "Welcome back, sweetheart. You gave us quite a scare." Emily's voice came out weak. Where am I?" "Boston General. You were in an accident. You lost a lot of blood, but you're going to be okay now." Emily's fingers brushed over the IV tube. Did someone donate?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, you were lucky. We had a matching donor at the right moment. You can thank fate for that one." Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "I'd like to thank the person if I ever find them." The nurse chuckled. "You and everyone else who's ever gotten a second chance." That night, when the hospital grew quiet, Emily gazed out the window. Rain still drizzled outside, soft against the glass. She whispered to the night, "Whoever you are, thank you. I'll make it count, I promise." Across town, Ethan was having his own kind of night. His father had taken a bad turn, the hospital bills were stacking higher, and Ethan had worked double shifts just to keep up. Life had worn him thin. Still, something small had changed in him since that blood drive. He couldn't explain why, but lately he'd felt lighter, as if some invisible burden had shifted. He stopped by a cafe near the construction site before heading home. The TV above the counter showed a short local news segment. Young journalist Emily Carter survives a near-fatal crash thanks to timely blood donation. Ethan didn't pay much attention, just another headline. But when the camera panned briefly over her picture, pale face, Brown eyes, faint smile. Something in him froze. He couldn't explain it. There was something hauntingly familiar about her expression. Something pure. Something that tugged at his chest. He stared at her name on the screen. Emily Carter. Lucky girl, he muttered quietly. But deep down, something stirred. A feeling he couldn't name. A thread pulling quietly between two souls that had never met, yet somehow recognized each other. That night, both of them looked out at the same stormy sky from different windows. Two strangers connected by one act of silent kindness. He didn't know that she was alive because of him, and she didn't know that the man who'd saved her life was living only a few blocks away. But the universe wasn't finished, because soon they would meet, not by chance, but by a chain of events that would test everything they both believed about life, love, and the quiet power of giving. 3 months later, the world had started to feel warm again. Spring had crept into Boston, sunlight spilling through the narrow streets, the smell of roasted coffee and blooming lilacs drifting through the air. Life had slowly returned to normal for Emily Carter, though the word normal didn't mean what it used to. After the accident, she had learned to walk again, write again, breathe again. Each morning she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not to a God she fully understood, but to the nameless stranger who had given her life a second chance. She didn't know his name, only that he had her blood type, and that his kindness had become the pulse beneath her own skin. Now, she sat by the window of the Willow Cafe, her laptop open, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. She was working on a new story, one that had been stirring in her since the crash. Its title glowed on the screen, The Invisible Heroes. The people who save lives without knowing it. But words weren't coming easily today. She stared out the window instead, watching people hurry past in the sunlight. Then, as the door opened and the small bell chimed, a gust of warm air brushed against her face. She looked up. A tall man walked in, Ethan Miles. His construction boots left faint marks on the tiled floor, his jacket dusted with cement. His eyes were tired but kind. He looked like someone who carried too many burdens quietly. He approached the counter, ordered a black coffee, and turned, scanning the cafe for an empty seat. Their eyes met. Just for a moment, something inside both of them shifted, subtle but deep. Emily didn't know why her heart skipped, and Ethan couldn't explain why he suddenly forgot how to breathe. It wasn't attraction exactly. It was something quieter, deeper, recognition. Ethan gave a small, polite smile and took the seat near her window, a few feet away. He pulled out a crumpled notebook, flipping through sketches of building plans and bills. Emily stole a glance, the kind people pretend isn't a glance at all, and noticed the roughness of his hands, the faint cut across his knuckle. She wondered what his story was. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the clinking of cups and the hum of quiet music. Then, by pure accident, Emily's pen rolled off her table, stopping near Ethan's boot. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a faint grin. "Guess it was trying to escape," he said. Emily smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It does that whenever I can't think straight." He nodded toward her laptop. "Writer? Trying to be," she replied. "I write stories about people. Real ones. Lately, about kindness." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Kindness, huh? Doesn't pay much, I bet." She laughed softly. "No, but it's the only thing that still makes sense to me." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides both understanding and pain. "Yeah, I get that." They talked for a while, about small things, about how Boston always smelled like rain, how the best donuts came from a bakery 2 streets away, how neither of them liked crowded places but somehow loved coffee shops. It felt easy, natural, as if they weren't meeting for the first time, but remembering something forgotten. When Ethan finally checked his watch, he frowned. "I've got to get back to work. But hey, it was nice talking to you." "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." He froze. Just a second too long. That name, he'd heard it before. He'd seen it on that TV screen months ago, but he brushed it off with a smile. Ethan Miles. Their hands met briefly in a handshake. Her touch was warm, soft, alive, and for a split second, Ethan felt something indescribable, like his own heartbeat answering hers. As he left the cafe, Emily watched him go, feeling a strange ache she couldn't explain. Later that evening, she opened her laptop again and began typing. Sometimes the people who save your life aren't doctors or heroes or angels. Sometimes they're just strangers, sitting quietly across from you, sipping coffee, unaware that the same blood runs between you. She smiled as she typed the final line. Maybe kindness isn't something we give. Maybe it's something we share without even knowing it. And somewhere across town, Ethan stopped mid-step, an odd warmth in his chest. He didn't know why, but for the first time in months, he smiled without forcing it. 2 strangers, One heartbeat, and fate, quietly, patiently, still weaving their story. The days grew brighter in Boston, but life had its quiet storms waiting beneath the calm. Emily's article, "The Invisible Heroes," had gone viral, read by thousands, shared by millions. Messages poured in from people across the country. Soldiers, nurses, teachers, blood donors, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for telling our story." Yet amidst the praise, Emily felt something missing. She couldn't explain it, but her heart kept returning to that man from the cafe, Ethan. His steady eyes, his quiet voice, the way he'd listened. They'd met again once or twice since. Small chats, nothing more. But something about him stayed with her long after they parted. It was a Friday evening when fate decided to move again. Emily was walking home from an interview near the waterfront. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. She crossed the quiet street, clutching her notes, her mind wandering, until she heard the screech of tires. A black SUV came sliding around the corner, its driver distracted by a ringing phone. Emily froze, her breath caught, everything slowed. The headlights, the roar of the engine, the paper flying from her hands. Then fell a blur, a man's voice shouting, "Watch out!" arms wrapping around her. The crash of metal against the railing. When she opened her eyes, she was on the ground, shaken, trembling, and someone was holding her protectively. Ethan. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, his chest heaving as he looked down at her. "You okay?" he breathed, voice rough. Emily's voice cracked. "Ethan, you saved me." He gave a faint, pained smile. "Guess it's just my thing now." People rushed over, the driver shouting apologies, sirens in the distance, but Emily didn't hear any of it. She only saw Ethan. This quiet man who'd somehow appeared exactly when she needed him most. Again, later at the hospital, while Ethan got his cut stitched, Emily sat by his side. She held his hand gently, the same way one might hold something fragile yet precious. "Why do you always show up when I'm falling apart?" she whispered, trying to smile through tears. He chuckled softly. "Maybe we're just meant to keep each other alive." Her eyes shimmered. "Do you believe in fate?" Ethan looked away, his voice low. "I didn't, not until you." For a long moment, they just sat there. Two souls who didn't yet know that this wasn't their second rescue. It was their second chance. And fate? It still had one more truth left to reveal. A truth that would change everything they thought they knew about how and why they'd found each other. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind streets glistening like glass. Emily sat in the hospital cafeteria, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, trying to steady her thoughts. Across the hall, Ethan was being discharged. A few stitches, a mild concussion, nothing serious. But for her, something deeper had been shaken. Twice now, twice, he'd saved her life. As she sat there, scrolling through her emails, a message caught her attention. It was from Boston General's Blood Donation Center, a routine update for those who had once received emergency transfusions. The email mentioned a donor appreciation event to honor those whose kindness saves lives every day. Attached below was a list of anonymous donors whose blood had been used in emergency cases during the night of her accident. Emily's eyes scanned the page, then froze. Donor Ethan Miles, O negative. Her breath hitched. For a long moment, the world fell away. The sound of chatter, footsteps, clinking trays, everything blurred into silence. She stared at the name again, her heart pounding so loud it felt like thunder inside her chest. Ethan Miles, the same name she'd heard just days ago, the man who had saved her on that rainy street, the man sitting a few rooms away. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone. It couldn't be coincidence. The universe didn't play tricks that specific. Tears welled in her eyes. Not of fear, but of realization. The man who had pulled her from death twice had already been a part of her life all along. Her steps felt heavy as she walked down the corridor toward his room. Ethan was sitting on the bed, pulling his jacket over his bandaged arm. He looked up and smiled softly when he saw her. "Hey, you didn't have to wait." Emily didn't speak right away. She just stood there, her eyes shimmering. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know." He frowned. "Know what?" She held out her phone with the email open. His name, his blood type, the date of donation. "You," she breathed. "It was you. You're the one who gave me blood after the accident. You saved my life before you even met me." Ethan's eyes widened, his lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, he just stared, as if trying to process something far bigger than coincidence. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You're the journalist from the news, Emily Carter." She nodded, tears spilling now. "I've been alive because of you all this time, and I didn't even know your name." Ethan exhaled shakily, looking down at his hands, the same hands that had donated blood that night, the same hands that had pulled her from danger again. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly. "I just gave blood." Emily stepped closer, her voice breaking. "You didn't just give blood, Ethan. You gave me time. You gave me a story. You gave me a second chance." He looked up, eyes glistening, and you gave me a reason to believe in something again. Silence filled the room, the kind that doesn't need words, just two people standing in the fragile miracle of what fate had woven between them. Then Emily smiled softly through her tears. Maybe kindness really is a circle. You saved me, and somehow, life brought me back to you. Ethan reached for her hand, slowly, uncertainly, but she took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, steady and sure. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the distant rhythm of life, two strangers finally realized they were never really strangers at all, because fate hadn't just crossed their paths, it had written their story in blood. The following days felt different, softer, slower, like the world had finally stopped rushing and decided to just breathe. Ethan and Emily began to see each other often, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet moments that made ordinary days feel extraordinary. A shared lunch in the hospital garden, a walk by the Charles River, late-night texts that started with "can't sleep" and ended with "good night." For Ethan, it was strange. He'd spent most of his life surviving one paycheck at a time, his heart shielded by walls built from hardship. But Emily, she was warmth he didn't know he needed. Her laughter, her empathy, the way she noticed beauty in the simplest things. She made the noise in his head go quiet. One afternoon, they sat at the same coffee shop where they first met, the Willow Cafe. Rain fell softly against the window, the smell of fresh espresso filling the air. Emily stirred her drink absent-mindedly, her voice gentle. You ever think about how weird it is that blood, just red liquid, can tie two lives together like this? Ethan smiled faintly. I never thought about it before, but now, I guess it's more than blood. It's like the universe's way of saying we're all connected somehow. She nodded, watching him. Do you ever regret donating that day? He chuckled. Regret? That 20 minutes gave me you. How could I regret that? Her cheeks flushed softly, but she didn't look away. You say that like we were meant to meet. He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. Maybe we were. Maybe all the bad stuff, my dad's illness, your accident, maybe it all happened just to bring us here. Emily's heart swelled. She'd spent months wondering why she'd survived that night. But now, sitting across from Ethan, it all made sense. Some stories weren't meant to end in tragedy. They were meant to begin there. She reached across the table, brushing her fingers against his. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll never forget how this started. That no matter where life takes us, we'll always live like we owe the world one more act of kindness. Ethan nodded slowly, his thumb grazing her hand. I promise. And he meant it, not as a romantic line, but as a vow written deep into his soul. They left the cafe, walking side by side under one umbrella, the rain tapping like a quiet applause from the sky. That night, Emily began writing her next article, The Promise of Blood. It wasn't about science or medical facts. It was about humanity, how one small act could echo through time, how kindness could create stories no one planned but everyone needed. As she typed the final line, she smiled through tears. He gave me blood, I gave him faith. And together we learned that the heart doesn't just beat for itself, it beats to keep others alive. And somewhere across the city, Ethan reread her last text before sleeping. Just 3 words that said everything. Thank you again. He smiled to himself and whispered into the quiet, always. But fate wasn't done with them yet, because sometimes, when two lives are tied by something deeper than love, destiny likes to test how strong that bond really is. It had been 6 months since that rainy afternoon at the Willow Cafe. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm, morning texts, late-night calls, and weekends spent walking through Boston's autumn streets. Ethan looked healthier than ever, his laughter coming easier, his eyes brighter. Emily often said he looked like a man who had finally found peace, but peace can be fragile, and sometimes destiny waits in silence before it strikes again. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Ethan was at the construction site, finishing his shift when he suddenly felt dizzy. The world tilted, sounds blurred, and before he could call out for help, darkness swallowed everything. He woke up in flashes, sirens, panicked voices, and bright hospital lights. His chest felt heavy. The last thing he saw before slipping under again was Emily's face, pale, terrified, calling his name. Hours later, Emily sat outside the ICU, her hands trembling. The roles had reversed. She was no longer the one being saved, she was the one praying. Dr. Patel approached her with a grave expression. Emily, his heart is failing. He needs a transplant. Her breath caught. A transplant. But he was fine. He was perfectly fine. The doctor sighed softly. Sometimes old infections leave hidden scars. His heart's too weak now. Emily broke down, her mind spiraling back to the day Ethan had donated his blood, the day he had unknowingly saved her. And now, she sat outside his room, powerless, watching monitors decide his fate. For days, she barely slept. She stayed by his bedside, whispering stories, reading him old texts, holding his hand as if her warmth alone could keep him alive. One night, as the machines beeped steadily beside him, she whispered through tears, "You once said maybe everything bad happens to bring us here. So please, Ethan, let this not be the end. Let this be another beginning." The nurse quietly placed a hand on her shoulder. "You should rest." But Emily just shook her head. "Not until he opens his eyes." Outside, rain began to fall again, the same soft rhythm that had brought them together. And somewhere deep inside that fragile heart, Ethan heard her voice through the darkness. A flicker, a beat, a whisper of life returning. The monitor beeped stronger. Emily gasped, clutching his hand tighter. "Ethan, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, his lips moving faintly. Always, tears streamed down her cheeks. In that one word, everything they'd promised at the Willow Cafe came back. The kindness, the connection, the vow to never forget how it all began. But as she leaned over him, smiling through tears, the doctor entered the room with cautious hope. "He's stable, but not out of danger. We still need a donor." Emily's smile faded. Fate had saved him for now, but the real test was just beginning, because sometimes love alone isn't enough to keep a heart beating. The days that followed felt like living inside a clock that had stopped ticking. Every second stretched painfully long. Every heartbeat in Ethan's monitor became a prayer. Emily spent hours beside him, tracing the veins in his hands, whispering old memories to a man lost between life and goodbye. Dr. Patel's words echoed endlessly in her mind. "We still need a donor." The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Families came and went, some crying, some hopeful. But Emily stayed rooted to one spot, watching, waiting, breaking a little more each day. One morning, Dr. Patel approached gently. "There's been no match yet," he said softly. "We're doing everything we can, but time isn't on our side." Emily nodded numbly. "How long does he have?" The doctor hesitated. "Days, maybe weeks." When he walked away, Emily stood frozen. Her world was collapsing. The man who once gave her a second chance was now dying for lack of one. And for the first time, she understood what true helplessness felt like. That night, Emily wandered into the hospital chapel. The candles flickered in the dim light, shadows dancing on the walls. She knelt down, clasping her hands tightly. "God, if you're listening," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you already took my fear once when he saved me. If there's a price for keeping him alive, take it from me." Tears blurred her vision, falling onto the marble floor. She stayed there for hours, praying, pleading, surrendering. Then fate moved again. The next morning, as dawn spilled through the windows, the hospital phone rang. A voice on the other end said the words Emily had been waiting for. "There's a donor, young, healthy. It's a match." She burst into tears, thanking the heavens. But when Dr. Patel walked in, his face carried a strange heaviness. "The donor was in a car accident last night," he said quietly. "The family has agreed to donate the heart." Emily froze. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed inside her. Gratitude, guilt, disbelief. Someone else's tragedy had become their miracle. Hours later, as Ethan was prepped for surgery, Emily stood by his bed, her hand resting over his chest. "You once gave me blood," she whispered, voice breaking. "Now someone else is giving you a heart. Maybe that's how the world balances itself, through the kindness of strangers." Ethan's eyes fluttered open just enough to meet hers. "Promise me," he rasped weakly, "no matter what happens, you'll keep writing. Tell people. Kindness isn't small." She nodded, tears falling freely. "I promise." They wheeled him away, and she stood there watching the doors close, her heart shattering and hoping all at once. The hours crawled by. The surgery was long, tense and silent. Emily waited outside, clutching her pendant, a small charm Ethan had once given her, shaped like a heartbeat line. Then finally, the doors opened. Dr. Patel stepped out, exhaustion written on his face, but this time he was smiling. "The transplant was successful," he said softly. "He made it." Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands. It felt unreal, like love had fought death and won. Days later, when Ethan finally opened his eyes, she was there, the same way he had been when she first woke up months ago. He looked at her weakly and whispered, "Still here?" She smiled through tears. "Always." And as she leaned closer, listening to the steady rhythm in his chest, a stranger's heart beating for him, she realized something beautiful. Sometimes love doesn't end when hearts break. It begins when hearts are shared. It had been 3 weeks since Ethan's surgery. 3 long, fragile weeks of healing, sleepless nights and whispered prayers. The scar on his chest was still fresh, but life had quietly returned to his eyes. Emily visited every day, bringing books, coffee, and the kind of warmth only love could give. The hospital room was filled with flowers and get-well cards, but one small envelope on the side table caught Ethan's attention. It had no sender's name, only a hospital stamp and 3 simple words on the front. For the recipient, Dr. Patel entered as Ethan turned the envelope in his hands. That came from the donor's family, he explained gently. They asked if you'd like to read it. It's entirely your choice. Ethan hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly. I think I should. Emily moved closer, her heart pounding as he unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, but heavy with grief. Dear recipient, if you're reading this, it means a part of our son still lives on, inside you. His name was Noah. He was 23. He loved photography, sunrises, and helping people without expecting anything in return. The night he died, he was on his way home from volunteering at a community center. A truck ran a red light. We lost him in seconds, but knowing that his heart still beats somewhere, it gives us peace. Please, whoever you are, live fully, laugh often, love deeply, and when you feel your heart race, know that a piece of Noah is out there, smiling through you. With love, Noah's parents. By the time Ethan finished reading, his hands were shaking. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. The room fell silent, except for the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Noah's heart still beating strong. Ethan pressed the letter to his chest. He saved me, just like I once saved you. Emily nodded through tears. And maybe that's why you were meant to survive, to carry him forward. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the sound of his new heartbeat. It felt different, stronger, not just a reminder of what he'd lost, but of what he'd been given. In the morning, he asked Dr. Patel for something unexpected. Can I meet them? His parents? The doctor smiled gently. They'd like that. A week later, Ethan and Emily walked into a small suburban house just outside Boston. The air smelled of lilies and photographs lined the walls, pictures of a smiling young man with kind eyes. Noah's mother stood in the doorway, tears glistening as she whispered, "You're the one." Ethan nodded softly. "Because of your son, I'm still here." Without a word, she stepped forward and placed her hand over his chest. For a long moment, she just stood there, feeling her son's heartbeat through another man's body. Tears streamed down her face, but she smiled through them. "It's him," she whispered. "It's really him." Emily watched silently, her own heart breaking and healing at the same time. When they left that day, Noah's mother hugged Ethan tightly and said, "Promise me you'll keep his heart full of kindness." He nodded. "I will, every day." As they walked away, Emily slipped her hand into his. "What does it feel like?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, eyes glistening. "It feels like I'm carrying more than one story now." And that night, as he lay beside Emily, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his ribs, he realized life had given him a heart twice, one to survive and one to remember. Because sometimes love isn't just between two souls, it's between all the hearts that refuse to stop beating, no matter what. Spring had returned to Boston. Soft winds, cherry blossoms, and the scent of new beginnings. Ethan and Emily often walked by the Charles River now. No hospital bracelets, no IV lines, just two souls stitched together by fate, healing in the light of everything they'd survived. Months had passed since the surgery, but the letter from Noah's parents still rested in Ethan's wallet, folded, worn, but never forgotten. Every time he felt his heartbeat, he remembered the promise, keep his heart full of kindness. Emily watched him one evening as he stood by the water, the wind brushing his hair, his hand resting lightly over his chest. "You think about him often, don't you?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Every day. I used to wonder why I survived all those close calls, the accident, the heart failure, but now I get it. Maybe I was meant to carry his story, not just mine." That night over coffee, Emily pulled out her laptop. "Then let's tell it," she said. Not as tragedy, but as hope. Together they began writing their story, Noah's story, the story of blood and heart, kindness and fate. Emily's words flowed like water. "A man once gave me his blood, another gave the man his heart, and together their kindness built a chain that turned strangers into family." She titled the article, "The Full Circle." When it was published, it didn't just go viral, it ignited something across the nation. People started signing up as organ donors, blood drives overflowed, and hospitals reported a surge in volunteers. The story reached TV shows, schools, even the Senate floor, where it was cited as proof that compassion saves more than lives. It saves humanity. Months later, Ethan and Emily stood on a stage at a donor awareness event. Noah's parents sat in the front row, tears glistening as Ethan spoke into the microphone. "I used to think saving someone's life was luck, but now I know it's a choice. Every drop of blood, every donated heart, every act of kindness creates a circle that never ends." The audience rose in applause, Not for fame or glory, but for the unseen connections binding everyone in that room. After the event, as the sun dipped behind the city, Emily turned to Ethan and smiled. "Do you realize what you've done?" He chuckled. "No, what?" "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You kept his heart full of kindness." Ethan looked up at the sky, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his ribs, his, Noah's, and somehow hers too. "Maybe hearts don't belong to us," he said softly. "Maybe we just borrow them to pass on love while we can." They stood there, arms around each other, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. And as the night wrapped around them, a gentle wind rustled through, carrying with it the echo of 3 intertwined stories: a blood donor, a heart donor, and a love that made it all matter. Because sometimes fate doesn't just connect lives, it completes them. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Boston, the kind that paints the world in gold and amber. The Charles River shimmered like melted glass, and the soft hum of violins filled the air. Under a canopy of maple trees, Ethan stood at the altar, his heart, the gift of another man, beating faster than ever. He wasn't nervous, he was grateful. Emily walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, sunlight catching her veil like spun silver. Every step she took seemed to echo with memories. Hospital rooms, laughter through pain, and the first time she realized that love doesn't always come when you expect it. Sometimes it's born from tragedy and grows into something eternal. As she reached him, Ethan whispered, "You look like hope." Emily smiled, eyes glistening. "And you look like a second chance." The ceremony wasn't grand, but it was sacred. Only a few people attended. Close friends, doctors, and in the front row, Noah's parents. They held hands tightly, tears in their eyes, not of sorrow, but of pride. For them, this wasn't the loss of their son. It was the continuation of his spirit. When the officiant asked if anyone would like to speak, Noah's father rose slowly. His voice trembled, but carried strength. "My son's heart beats inside this man, and today, I see it, not just beating, but living. Ethan and Emily, you've turned pain into purpose. You've given our boy's memory wings." The crowd was silent. Even the wind paused. Emily reached for Ethan's hand, and together they wept, not from sadness, but from the beauty of connection that life had carved for them. When they exchanged vows, Ethan said softly, "I promise to live every heartbeat with gratitude, for the life I was given, for the man who made it possible, and for the woman who showed me what it means to truly be alive." Emily's voice trembled as she replied, "And I promise to love you, not just for who you are, but for everyone whose kindness made you whole." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the wind picked up, gentle, warm, and filled with whispers, as if the universe itself was applauding. Later that night, under fairy lights and laughter, Emily noticed Ethan step away toward the river. She followed quietly and saw him holding a small glass vial. Inside it, a drop of red liquid. "Noah's first blood donation," he said softly. "I kept it as a reminder of where it all began." Together, they released the vial into the river, not as loss, but as a gift returned to the flow of life. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "So, this is forever?" Ethan smiled. "No, this is infinity." The camera of life panned out, the river shimmering, the stars awakening, and 2 souls holding each other close, carrying within them the legacy of love, life, and a promise that had come full circle. Because in the end, love isn't found, it's passed on. Years passed, but the story of Ethan, Emily, and Noah never faded. It evolved. Together, Ethan and Emily built something extraordinary, the Noah Heart Foundation, dedicated to blood and organ donation awareness. What started as a small local campaign soon spread across America. From schools to hospitals, from churches to community halls, thousands signed up to donate, inspired by a story that proved love and kindness could outlive even death itself. In time, Ethan and Emily had a daughter. They named her Grace Noah Thompson. The day she was born, Ethan held her tiny hand and whispered, "You're part of 3 hearts, my little one. Yours, mine, and the one that saved us." Emily smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "She's our miracle," she said softly. Every year, on the anniversary of Noah's heart transplant, the 3 of them visited the Charles River. They brought flowers, lit a candle, and told Grace the story of how her parents met, how a stranger's blood, a donor's heart, and a woman's love created a family. Grace would listen wide-eyed, and when they finished, she'd always ask the same question, "Mama, where is Noah now?" And Emily would point to Ethan's chest and say, "Right there, and everywhere kindness lives." Years later, when Ethan grew old and gray, he often sat by the river alone at sunset, his heartbeat still strong, steady, grateful. One evening, Emily found him there, gazing at the horizon. "You thinking about him again?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Always, but not with sadness anymore, with peace." She took his hand, their fingers still fitting perfectly after all these years. "He'd be proud of you," she whispered. Ethan looked at her with soft eyes. "No, we made him proud." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the laughter of children, The hum of life, the echo of compassion. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling it all. The circle that began with a drop of blood and ended in a lifetime of love. As the camera of life pulled back one last time, the river shimmered under the golden light, endless, flowing, eternal, just like kindness. One act of kindness can outlive 1,000 lifetimes. And with that, the story of Ethan, Emily, and Noah came full circle, not ending but continuing, in every heartbeat that chose to give, in every hand that chose to help, and in every soul that chose to love. The end.